Where did the Earth come from? It is known that there are more brown dwarf stars than bright stars. Some astronomers have recently realized that a planet orbiting such a star closely would be the place to look for life. But brown dwarfs, like all stars, are an electrical discharge phenomenon. Their visible diameter, like that of the enormous cometary comets, is an electric discharge phenomenon and much larger than the star's solid surface. So the fundamental mass-luminosity relation used to derive the mass, age, and size of a star from the character of its light is inapplicable. The electrical nature of stars removes the foundation of stellar astrophysics. However, a binary pair of brown dwarfs has been discovered, which allow the determination of their masses and diameters by another method. The result was that both dwarfs are remarkably large for their masses, about the same diameter as the Sun. That's about the same size as the coma of the comet Holmes. Their masses were said to be 35 to 55 times Jupiter's mass. The Sun is about 1,000 times the mass of Jupiter, although mass is not a measure of the amount of matter in a body, another major spanner in the works for stellar astrophysics. Brown dwarfs of that size are considered to be too small to initiate thermonuclear fusion, but that just isn't so in an electric universe, where all bodies receive electrical energy from the galactic circuit. For example, consider Jupiter as an independent body moving in the galaxy inside its radiant plasma sheath. Analogous to a cometary tail, it would be regarded as a brown dwarf star. And even if the glowing sphere were half the size of Jupiter's present magnetosphere, which is about 10,300,000 kilometers in diameter, all of Jupiter's large moons would orbit comfortably inside that cocoon. I have noted the significance of this earlier. Since an electric star is heated externally, a planet need not be destroyed by orbiting beneath its anode glow. In fact, life is not only possible inside the glow of a small brown dwarf, it seems far more likely than on a planet orbiting outside a star. This is because the radiant energy arriving on a planet orbiting inside the glowing sphere is evenly distributed over the entire surface of the planet. There are no seasons, no tropics, and no ice caps. A planet does not have to rotate. Its axis can point in any direction, and its orbit can be eccentric. Such an arrangement is far more benign toward life than at present, where the energy source, the Sun, subtends a small angle in the sky, and the habitable zone, in parentheses, of orbits is very narrow. In our neighborhood, there may be many more brown dwarfs than Sun-like stars. They are difficult to detect since they glow mostly in infrared. A spectral class of L dwarfs, about 1/10 the mass of the Sun, has been found with an effective temperature of only 700 K to 950 K. About the same as the surface of Venus at 740 K. This is way below the theoretical limit of 1750 K for a nuclear-powered dwarf star, while it is not a problem for the electric star model. The light from the L dwarfs is unaccountably bluer than expected and even exhibits X-rays. Only the electric model has a simple explanation for this conundrum. The higher energy radiation is emitted from the brown dwarf's electrical corona. Therefore, the light bathing a satellite will be strongest at the blue and red ends of the spectrum. Skylight on any satellites would probably be a pale purple. See later the classical purple dawn of creation. Photosynthesis relies on red light, so plant life could flourish, especially when the atmospheres of the L dwarfs contain predominantly water molecules. Satellites would accumulate atmosphere, and water would mist down. Brown dwarfs are noted for their occasional inexplicable polar jets and flaring. As explained in my Electric Stars article, stars that do not have bright, tufted photospheres do not have the power feedback control that maintains the steady radiant output of the sun, while the power input varies, as measured by X-rays and sunspot latitudinal migration. So any power surge on a brown dwarf will be met with polar jets and flaring behavior. We know from coronal mass ejections, CMEs, on the Sun that this involves hurling matter into space. Flaring would cause havoc on the satellites of a brown dwarf. In the extreme, it would give birth to a new satellite, but existing satellites would suffer deposition of solids, liquids, gases, and electrical discharge machining on their surfaces. This is a scenario never considered by geologists, but which explains all of the enigmas of planetary geology. Let's assume that brown dwarfs and their satellites are the most hospitable places in the universe to establish life. That implies that the Earth was originally a satellite of a brown dwarf. That would explain many things. For example, where we got our water and oxygen atmosphere, why the high latitudes were so warm in the past that we find coal in Antarctica, how the Earth's gravity and atmosphere in the past could have been so different that it supported megafauna and megaflora, what caused the global mass extinctions with instant burial and fossilization, and so on. Each star, being an electrical body in a galactic discharge, will have a plasma sheath that limits the weak electric field between the star and the sheath. It is the Sun's heliosphere. The plasma sheath is a double layer, where almost the entire voltage drop between the star and the galaxy will be found. The heliosphere is about 200 AU across. That's a big target. You could fit about 1,300 such targets between the nearest star and us. The size of this electrical target is important because it is the minimum distance at which the electrical insulation between two stars breaks down. I say minimum because the polar circuit of each star extends much, much further. As we see where the circuit has been lit up in a planetary nebula. This beautiful example of a binary nebula shows the classic features of a plasma Z-pinch. The current density in the Birkeland current filaments is sufficient to cause the plasma to enter glow mode. The polar circuit is composed of concentric cylinders of parallel Birkeland current filaments. The polar double layers are regions of high electric field and radio noise. The cylinders pinch down at the star in the characteristic hourglass shape. So what I'm suggesting is quite radical, that all of the planets and moons in the solar system did not originate with the sun. They were captured. Capture of a brown dwarf star begins when the plasma sheaths touch and they see each other electrically for the first time. The brown dwarf changes from being an anode into a galactic discharge to a cathode in the sun's environment. The adjustment is drastic. The brown dwarf is no longer a star. It becomes the mother of all comets that adjust and subject to a steady electrical acceleration toward the sun. That acceleration will tend to cause the satellites of the brown dwarf to be dislodged from their orbits and in a dynamic equilibrium strung out behind their primary cometary wake. Since a comet's ion tail is a discharge current, the satellites will experience mega auroras and devastating interplanetary discharges to varying degrees. As a cathode in the sun's discharge, the brown dwarf will jet matter into space like a comet and lose electrons. This has the effect of reducing gravity and apparent mass of the late star, which in turn modifies its orbit. Conservation of orbital energy requires that the cometary body moves in toward the Sun. In other words, it is captured. We see so-called non-gravitational acceleration to a small extent in modern comets. This lowering of the gravitational field of comets has given rise to the mistaken view that they are fluff balls. However, they look like solid rock, and they are solid rock. The effect on a captured brown dwarf is to turn it into a low-density gas giant. As the captured brown dwarf traverses the plane of the ecliptic, it encounters a current sheet of the solar wind that may cause severe flaring and mass loss in the form of new cometary material. Even today, crossing the ecliptic plane is where comets are most likely to fragment. The enhanced electromagnetic forces encountered in the plane of the ecliptic may cause damped oscillations in and out of the plane until capture is complete. The presence of the newcomer is felt electrically by those planets that encounter its coma or cometary tail. Charge transfer occurs via the filamentary currents in the tail, which serves to space the orbits of both bodies until charge transfer is minimized. Circularization of orbits also occurs due to the charge exchange with the solar wind until the voltage excursions in the Sun's weak radial electric field are minimized. Trying to devise an evolutionary model of the solar system from a simple beginning is not going to work. The expert was almost right. We need a separate story for each of the gas giants, and we need to identify their scattered family members. The simplest approach is to match axial tilts because phase lock with the primary is normal for a satellite. And a spinning planet or moon behaves as a gyroscope and largely maintains its axial direction in inertial space, even when disturbed. A disturbance manifests as precession of the spin axis. For example, based upon the independent evidence, Saturn, Earth, and Mars were of one family. Their axial tilts are 26.44, 23.27, and 23.59 degrees respectively. Saturn still has its ephemeral water ice ejector rings, and its calculated density is the lowest, less than water, a result of its recent severe discharge activity. A final word about meteorites, comets, and asteroids. They have nothing to do with the Sun. They are born at intervals from captured bodies and their cometary phase, and during close electrical encounters between planets and moons, in the process of capture or orbit stabilization. In 1988, I wrote that chondritic meteorites show all of the features to be expected of material that has been subjected to flash heating, acceleration, collision, and ion implementation.
Spatially restricted and compressed plasma stream followed by sudden cooling, isotopic modification by
neutron bombardment, and intense radiation are simply explained as the effects of a Z-pinch plasma discharge. I predict that the features of chondrule shells could be reproduced in the lab in a plasma oven. That remains to be tested. Planets do not collide. Electrical forces and modification of orbits by charge exchange dominate in a close encounter. Mars bears fresh electrical scars of its entry into the solar system. With the mighty gash of Valles Marineris and the giant raised lightning blisters on the Tharsis Bulge, an interplanetary discharge is the only way for the Martian meteorites
to have been launched into space. It should be no surprise that this story of the formation of the solar system could not be constructed on a purely theoretical basis. It was wishful thinking that such a complex family could be explained with one simple story. We now have the technology in a select few laboratories to generate in miniature and record cosmic electrical discharges. It allows us to verify that prehistoric mankind cut into solid rock their view of the last spectacular and frightening chapter in the history of the solar system. The capture of Earth by the Sun. Comparative mythologists pointed the way by showing that the bedrock themes of mythology are universal and relate to memories of capricious planetary gods, warring with thunderbolts in the heavens and wreaking destruction with them on Earth. It gives us an unusual depth of meaning to the memory of the purple dawn of creation. Prehistoric mankind witnessed the creation of a new order in the heavens, the assembly of planets we see today. The serendipitous breakthrough in understanding of petroglyphs and the motivation behind their production requires that this story be examined thoroughly in the light of discoveries from space. Wal Thornhill.
Please join me for a few minutes of this wonderful Wal Thornhill video for the article to go along with it. Strongly recommend the whole video. You'll find the link in the description. This channel wishes to salute Wallace Thornhill for pointing the way to the future and for his tireless work.
Previously, I promised to talk about what the James Webb Telescope may tell us about newborn planets and the subsequent formation of planetary systems. I said, and I quote, "It includes the formation of the solar system and the recent history of the Earth. It's a cosmology that involves us." End quote. Those who have watched the feature-length videos on the Thunderbolts website, Symbols of an Alien Sky, and the lightning-scarred planet Mars, may appreciate the extent of the revolution in all the sciences and humanities that are implied by the electric universe paradigm. Fred Hoyle in 1950 expressed it well. Open quote, "If there is one important result that comes out of our inquiry into the nature of the universe, it is this. When by patient inquiry we learn the answer to any problem, we always find, both as a whole and in detail, that the answer thus revealed is finer in concept and design than anything we could ever have arrived at by a random guess." End quote. Thankfully, the $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope has been successfully launched towards its parking spot 1.6 million kilometers away. That's about 4 times the distance to the Moon. We are told it will take a month to get there and another 5 months before its infrared eyes are ready to start scanning the cosmos in a high-stakes quest to behold light from the first stars and galaxies and to scour the universe for hints of life. The technology is amazing, but the real science that is needed to properly understand the observations is non-existent. Our sapphire plasma experiment proved that astrophysicists don't understand stars and their source of radiant energy. The notion of first light is based solely on the Big Bang creation myth, which I dealt with in part 1 of this series. As for gravitational cosmology, Newton's view of gravity has only been shown to work in the solar system, and Einstein's warped view of gravity in his non-physical theory of space and time did away with Newton's force of gravity, the force we experience every waking moment. Einstein stopped doing science by elasticizing the fundamental standards of length and time. At the same time, quantum theory divorced physical cause from effect, which is fundamental to science. So it is no surprise that recent articles declare an emergency in Big Bang cosmology and offer no obvious way out of the dead end. Meanwhile, All other creation myths from around the world have been shown by scholars to have a common origin in a celestial cosmology that is ignored, while featuring identifiable planets battling with strange-looking thunderbolts in a doomsday sky. Their creation stories tell of the establishment of the present sky following a period of apocalyptic chaos. Rationally, those stories can have nothing to do with the creation of the universe. On December 1st, New Scientist published an article titled, "Is Our Solar System a Cosmic Oddity? Evidence from Exoplanets Says Yes." The author goes on to suggest that the story of the formation of the solar system has started to look like a fairy tale. It is, in fact, a bedtime story invented to make us feel safe, because the echoes of those creation events have imprinted an instinctive existential fear in humans, which we see manipulated by many unprincipled leaders throughout history. The solar system has a frightful recent history that is essential to grasp before we have any hope of understanding exoplanetary systems, ourselves, or life in the universe. The hopes and massive investment in the James Webb Space Telescope will not benefit us all without real science to understand the observations. So an introduction is essential because the events I'm about to describe and explain in the upcoming New Year episode is so different to anything you have heard before. The panorama is both breathtaking and disturbing. It changes everything. In part 2 of this series on the discoveries available to the James Webb Space Telescope, I explained the simultaneous electric birth of stars and gas giant planets in molecular clouds. This has now been essentially confirmed by a report this week in phys.org, whereby up to 170 free-floating Jupiter-sized planets have been found 420 light-years away in a star cluster in the Milky Way. This number greatly exceeded expectations. They were only found because they were hot enough to glow in infrared light. It's assumed they were born recently, and it is only their natal heat that allows us to see them. But in an electric galaxy, all free-floating bodies will intercept some electrical energy sufficient to heat them, so they are not steadily cooling and their age is indeterminate. But this discovery raises serious problems for the standard hypothesis that such bodies form by gravitational accretion about a bright star and subsequent ejection by planet-to-planet scatterings. In the electric universe of electric stars, these free-floating Jupiter-sized planets are formed singly or in pairs at the low end of the brown dwarf star masses. In my previous space news I wrote, and I quote, "These stars are arguably the most important target for the infrared James Webb Telescope because they are the most numerous and some of the closest stars to us. The telescope should confirm that all brown dwarfs are gas giant-sized bodies enclosed in a huge red anode glow. To give some idea, if Jupiter's present invisible plasma sheath were lit up, it would appear in the sky at opposition the size of the Sun. Brown dwarfs are simply small red giants." Helton Arp. Unlike the Big Bang unbalanced universe, the electric universe is in balance with a dipolar gravitational force, which is identical to the magnetic force but manifests weakly due to the gravitational distortion of the electrical structure within the electron and proton, inside the atoms of a celestial body. The gravity of that body is established by the powerful long-range electromagnetic convection of matter into the centre of the Birkeland current filament in a molecular cloud. Being a dipole electric force, the gravity of a star or planet will change with changes to the surface charge of that body. This provides the essential feedback mechanism required for the ready capture of passing bodies and the rapid stabilization of orbits. Helton Arp provided a fundamental benchmark for real cosmology when he found that the universe is not expanding. It is balanced and requires a repulsive gravity to explain his extensive observations. Gravitational pole facing outwards. They will repel each other. Every ponderable body is subject to that repulsive force of gravity from all of the other matter in the universe. a manifestation of Mach's principle, which results in gravity appearing to be an attractive force. This attribute is essential to understand our survival of the planetary close encounters recorded by our prehistoric mythmakers and memorialized by cultures around the world. It explains why the first civilizations arose suddenly in a thunderclap following those events. The unexpectedly large number of free-floating Jupiter-sized planets in a single nearby star cluster, announced in the phys.org report, has particular significance for our electric universe cosmology. In the electric universe, these objects are not free-floating planets, but are in fact brown dwarf stars that glow in infrared because they are receiving a low level of electric power from the galactic circuit, sufficient to establish a discharge manifesting as a red anode sheath. Such objects form a reservoir of brown dwarf stellar systems that could encounter and become integrated into a more powerful star system, like that of our Sun. That there are so many of them goes to explain why such an event is not only plausible, but inevitable.